start with the basics. Probably a burning question for some. What is tokenomics, and why is it important to have tokenomics in place?
Yeah, I can give it a shot. So essentially, tokenomics is like a neologism. It combines two different words. You have token on one hand, and then economics on the other. And yeah, so that's what it's about. It's like token economy. And similar to conventional economies, you have a supply and a demand side, and that's also what we have here. So whenever we speak of tokenomics, we speak of the supply and demand of a token. So we focus on, first and foremost, how does the supply of the token look like? How is it distributed, allocated, stuff like that? And then on the demand side, what kind of mechanisms drives the demand of the token? So essentially, that's what tokenomics is.
I think you can also see tokenomics like a blueprint of the system and how it works, a little bit like a car. You want to be certain that you have some kind of equilibrium of gas and oil coming into the engine, and that's also what tokenomics is trying to explain, figuring out what is the equilibrium of demand and supply, and how is it used in the system.
Yeah, fully agreed.
Fully like our traditional economies. There you also explore consumption and product and service and distribution and product and services, and that's a little bit like what we are doing here.
Yes, exactly. It's basically a design problem, right? It's how do you create incentive mechanisms to achieve a specific objective of the project? You mentioned the supply and demand sides. Why is it beneficial to approach tokenomics from both? And we talk about when you look at some of the projects in the industry, sometimes it's heavily focused on the supply side, on vesting terms or inflation or emissions, and some projects more focused on accruing value to the token, for example. What is the benefit of looking at both?
Yeah, so I would say that also including demand side is quite crucial. Essentially, if there's no demand for the token, then it fails to function as a token, as a utility token. There's essentially no utility attached, and I think we have seen that with some projects where they sort of issue a token as a means of raising capital, and then afterwards they create a separate system where the token is not really needed. And it is also from like a ecosystem incentive or network incentive point of view, it's really important to actually foster the demand of the token, because if not, why would the node operators have an incentive to accept the tokens in compensation, stuff like that. So essentially, it's also about network security, simply the network functioning properly. So if you don't have the demand side, I don't think the network will function properly, at least from my perspective.
Probably not long term, maybe in the short term, from an investment.
Yeah.
But if you want your token and also the token economy to be more viable in the long term, then you need to be certain to have some kind of mechanism in the system that creates a demand for the token, so there is some usage. And that's probably been neglected from, I don't know, 2017 to 2021 when we have the boom in the crypto industry, because it wasn't important. Just a lot of marketing, and then you had a good investment case. But I think that is changing. It's changing now, and that is becoming an increasing focus on the demand side.
Yeah. And also, if I can add to that, I also think like having a good demand side, like a good utility of the token, is also important from a utility or ecosystem point of view. So it can be a way of bootstrapping the ecosystem. So having a utility token that is of value and which attracts people, and as they provide value to the ecosystem, the value of the token also increases. So it is also important from an ecosystem perspective.
I think that's a really, really important point you bring up, and the fact that the tokens should benefit the ecosystem as a whole, and that can come from deriving, resilient, sound tokenomics incentives over time. And this is starkly different to this approach, an approach based on speculation and just looking into the short-term timeline where you just want to pump the token up and then increase it in terms of, quantity, and then there's a lot of dumping. That's not sustainable. So I just wanted to highlight the strategic approach here, that we're really looking at the long-term development and deriving these kind of incentives over time. Really great. I'd like to know then, what are the tagions used for in the system? If we look at the functionality at their functionality.
Okay, yeah. So initially it's the way we have done it, at least there are three different functions to it. At the most basic level, we use Tagion as a way to compensate node operators. We in exchange for their services, they are paid in TDN. So in that sense, it's like a means of compensation, you could say. But from the other side, it's also that the node operators themselves actually have to stake TDN to become an active node and be part of this validation process. First and foremost, TDN is used as a staking instrument, essentially, in the consensus layer. So that's one feature. Then on top of that, TDN is also used for transacting on the network. So whenever I want to send money to Nicolai, I would pay him a small fee denominated in TDN. So it's like the gas of the network, you could say. And on top of that, you could also say that long term, hopefully the decentralized applications that are going to be built on top of the network wants to provide their services in so that you could pay for them in TDN, or alternatively, you could actually start trading assets with TDN as the payment leg and stuff like that. So it's not only gas; it's also like a means of payment, you could say. So that's another level to it. I don't know if you have anything to add so far, Nicolai.
Oh, I think you're quite on point. So there's three staking mechanisms right now in the system, one in the bottom layer and two in the top layer. Of course, we use staking as a security mechanism for node operators, so they don't flood the network. That is one point. But then you can also stake on the treasury level, and that's more a governance principle. So to be able to actually interact and take decisions in the treasury, you have to stake your tokens. So that's another way to have some users of the TGN token.
Yeah. And if I could add to the treasury, so just to give you a bit of idea of what it actually is. So the treasury is not something that exists today. It's more of a not necessarily long-term vision, but a medium-term vision. So it's something that we will be working on integrating. And it's sort of like a decentralized autonomous organization where you have this entity which through different mechanisms collects TDN, which then the community, the ones who have staked the TDNs, they can vote on how to distribute them or alternatively burn them. So it's like as as the name suggests, it's a treasury. It collects and spends funds, and by staking your TDN, you get a vote in that treasury.
Yeah, that's a pretty good overview also of the different functionalities and the different structure, because tokenomics landscape is quite complex, and it has a lot of different elements that are dependent on each other. In this specific case, when we talk about the utility token, what kind of what is a utility token in the case of Tagion?
Yeah, so a utility token, generally speaking, is a token which grants you access to services or goods based on DLT, a distributed ledger, essentially. And yeah, there could be tons of different functions for that. It could be it's like a ticket that grants you access to some special service or goods. So I think at least the way I like to conceptualize it is a bit like a ticket. It grants you access to something, some service, some good out there in the market, but this market is based on a DLT.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also think that utility tokens, the scope of utility tokens is also increasing. Some systems has dedicated tokens for governance, but a utility token can also include governance processes and be a part of you can say aligning the interests of the actors of the system. So I think the scope is a little bit bigger, like it also is in our system for utility token.
What is the difference between a security, and how is that differentiated? Yes,
Yeah,
how do you
so
differentiate the two?
to make it a distinction, so a utility token grants you access to a service or good, which in this case TTNS, whereas security is a financial instrument which you buy with the intention of being paid back in some way, either in the form of interest or dividends, stuff like that.
I agree, but that's probably a gray area to
Absolutely.
mentor here. Also, different jurisdiction is taking different approaches to looking into security versus utility token. Especially the SEC has been very kind and tough on the different providers.
Yeah, that's a really good conception, and it's really important to keep in mind this distinction. We discussed quite a bit the demand side of the topic. Let's move on to the supply side. And referring back to what we said in the beginning in terms of creating long-term incentives and sustainability, how does the token allocation in the Tagion network support the long-term sustainability and growth?
So the token allocation is the initial distribution, or it represents the initial distribution. We have 5 different groups. We have Descartes, which is a commercial entity, which is both been a part of developing the system and also funding the development. Then we have the private investors, we have team and contributors, Tagion Foundation, and something that we call ecosystem incentives. So private investors and team and contributors, that is allocations that we use to fund the development of Tagion. The last 3 remaining groups, Descartes, Tagion Foundation, and ecosystem incentives, that is allocated to drive adoption, user adoption, product adoption of the system. Tagion Foundation is a little bit special in that regard. That is a non-profit entity incorporated in Liechtenstein, where it has a very specific purpose, and Jonas is probably better to articulate that than me. But I think it's something like it can operate under the purpose of maintaining, developing, and creating open source protocols that are aligned with the purpose of the Tagion system, something like that. So it's a pretty broad purpose, but still dedicated to the future of the Tagion system.
Yeah, and also if I can add to that, so actually a big part of what you're seeing here is actually being indirectly allocated to the foundation. So even though TDN are, let's say 35% are allocated for private investors, the proceeds from that sales are actually going back into the foundation so that they can fund the ongoing maintenance and enhancement of the Tagion infrastructure and stuff like that. Yeah, most of the token allocations are actually geared towards developing the ecosystem in one way or another.
Great. And I think that's a pretty important point also, the fact that tokens are also allocated to encouraging people to participate and contribute and explore and experiment what can be built on top of Tagion. Because Tagion, after all, is an infrastructure. It's like a road which others can build on top of. And this just also what you said shows that the economic infrastructure is incentivizing this kind of approach to development.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's completely right. So through the foundation, we're going to issue, for example, grants to assist projects in developing their innovative solutions on the Tagion ecosystem or Tagion network, stuff like that. So that's good that you mentioned that.
Yes, and this is just also a note to anyone listening. Feel free to reach out if you're curious about how to get involved. And going forward, we're also going to be releasing a lot of different activities that are going to become available about how you can contribute. And we hope also to continue developing this together with you. We're just getting started, so you'll be joining early if you join now. What is the so if a token is released in perpetuity and there's like no cap on it, are there risk of inflation? And in Tagion ecosystem, how is the inflation regulated? And is it inflationary, or is there a mechanism that is actually creating a deflationary effect? Can you elaborate on this?
You start, Jonas, or
Yeah, sure, sure. I can do that. Yeah, so at the outset there will be an emission rate of 1%, and what that means is that annually we're gonna issue, or the network is gonna issue, 370 million TDN, which are being used to compensate node operators. It's not fixed. It's not set in stone. It can be changed in the future if the community deems it necessary. But yeah, from the outset, it will be 1% inflation, or not exactly, because the thing is, while there is 370 million TDN being issued annually, there's also a burning mechanism, and the burning mechanism essentially is the gas fees paid by the users. So whenever you transact on a network, you pay a fee in TDN, and if the amount of gas used exceeds that of the emissions, so if the users collectively use more than 370 million TDN in gas, then the inflation rate becomes deflationary. So it becomes a deflation instead of inflation, essentially.
What is the significance of having a deflationary rate?
So of course it's like, again, conventional economies. If the supply shrinks, then it all comes down to the supply and demand. So if yeah, so essentially what it does is that, if the supply shrinks, then of course the value of those TDN that are left, of course, would increase. That would be the consequence, at least looking at it from a monetary perspective, I would say. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else you are hinting at, or
No, I just wanted the elaboration, because sometimes these terms are quite loaded, and there's also a lot of debate. If we look at deflationary currencies after the merge, for example,
oh yeah,
Ethereum
yeah, yeah.
became deflationary. So I just wanted to, for the sake of also people who are not in the space, to elaborate on this concept a little bit.
Yeah, and then again, the deflation, it really depends on, it's good that you pointed out, because inflation and deflation can have multiple different meanings depending on, how you use them in what context. And essentially when we speak of deflation, it's more that the supply is shrinking. It's not necessarily that the purchasing value increases. Yeah, which how you typically would refer to deflation, I would say. So that's not it. It's simply the supply of TTN that is decreasing.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that if the supply of the token deflates over time and that demand remains consistent or increases to some extent, the price of each token could rise? Would that be the thinking behind it?
Yeah, that would be like the logical consequence of it. Yes.
Okay. So that I hope also I know there was a question from Mass a couple days ago regarding pricing. Of course, we cannot say specific price of a token. That's just it would be very hypothetical. But if we look at the mechanism that supports this logic behind token issuance, if we're looking at Tagion TGN and it supports deflationary mechanism, then it could be inferred that the price could increase over time.